processors.
MultimediaJay radio style.
PC gamers, what you gonna do when Ryzenmania runs wild on you?
It's over. It's over. Shut off the microphone. I'm never going to sound proper now. Then again, I wasn't going to sound proper anyways because I'm getting over the latest bug going around the office and the overlapping bugs that I've had for the better part of this month. But we press on because Ryzen is really a big thing, and I can't miss this party no matter what. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to MultimediaJay Radio Style for Friday, February 24th, 2017, and Ryzen is a thing. We finally have something besides speculation to talk about with Ryzen. Now, I was making fun of how people were milking the living daylights out of Ryzen hype through speculation YouTube videos, speculation articles, blog entries. It's just Ryzen was the magic go-to word for when you ran out of material otherwise. Oh, I can't think of anything better to blog about. Let's talk about Ryzen for the umpteenth time, even though people aren't going to learn anything new from my ramble fest or what have you. But finally, we have something concrete. We have a release date. We have prices. We have some tech demos. We have some speeds, some core counts, everything that's not speculation that we would want from Ryzen. Everybody and their mother's uncle is talking about Ryzen. So use your search box, find whichever commentator suits your fancy, and feel free to listen to them if you want to hear the same 6 or 7 things that everybody is saying over and over again about the AMD Ryzen, because I'm actually going to gloss over that and talk about the rest of the story, what all these folks are not talking about. You can very easily find out about the price points, you can find out about the core counts, you can find out about the tech demos from Lisa Su's demo the other day. That's also on YouTube on AMD's channel. You can find out all kinds of stuff at the drop of a hat, but nobody wants to talk about the stuff that I'm talking about, which is the other part of the story for people who may be considering, oh, Ryzen's gonna change everything, that kind of thing. The rumor mill. Very hard to shut it down, but it is possible. So let's take a swing at it, shall we? First order of business, I am not getting a Ryzen on March 2nd. And probably not on April 2nd or May 2nd. I have no interest in Ryzen. I already built a Skylake system that has quite a bit of muscle, and the upgrade path is clearly to proceed via the graphics card, so I might end up with an AMD Vega later this year, but I am not touching Ryzen with a 10-foot pole. It's a new product, as I predicted. AMD is adopting Intel-level prices for this high-performance chip. Yes, they're undercutting Intel, but not by massive amounts except at the very top. But whether or not Intel can handle lower prices at the high end is completely something that folks are forgetting about, which we're going to be talking about here. But no, I'm not getting a Ryzen. It's not interesting to me yet. The one and only chip from this launch lineup that in any way, shape, or form gets me curious about Ryzen is the Ryzen 7 1700, the 8-core, 16-thread, 65-watter. Basically, the top of the line of the 65-watt processors in the assortment. You consider that Ryzens are overclockable, and 65 watts... Well, here's the thing. I'm currently working with a 91-watt Skylake. That was a massive step forward in terms of efficiency versus the 1090Ti that I left in the dust that capped at 125, and it was an event if the machine fell below 80, or not 80 watts, 100 watts even. You were lucky if you could hit 80 with that thing. But the thing is, the reason why I'm such a hippie when it comes to this green computing thing, and oh yeah, save the planet with less power drive, well, I'm not going crazy about that as much as I'm going crazy about the unfortunate fact the desktop computers have been pushed into a corner because the minute you put any kind of performance in them whatsoever, it becomes like driving a Mack truck in city traffic as your daily driver. Nowhere near efficient. It's terrible. You can build a computer that smashes the crap out of the consoles when you're playing games, but the rest of the time when you're browsing the web, the wattage doesn't come down to make the desktop still worth it as opposed to having just a laptop for your web browsing. This was something that I struggled with, trying to justify having a one-size-fits-all tower like I've tended to build in years gone by. So to see a competitive processor at the 65-watt mark, it has me wondering, what kind of performance can I squeeze out of that thing? It also has me wondering, what kind of wattage does that thing really draw when it's idle and running full blast? Exactly how efficient is this processor? I think I'm seriously going to have to see kilowatt readings before I make the switch, if I were to make the switch this year, as opposed to waiting for Ryzen Generation 2 and exploring the Zen architecture via Raven Ridge on a laptop as a console replacement later this year, which is actually more likely to happen versus, say, the Sandy Bridge Delosaurus thing that I was tossing around earlier. But I'm actually very curious, what kind of performance can I squeeze out of a 65-watt system, and is that TDP even worth looking at? I mean, the core temp power meter for the Intel chip that I have that's allegedly 91 watts, usually if I run the thing full blast with some kind of super CPU benchmark or something like that, it caps out in the 60s as far as wattage from the processor is concerned. So I have read about thermal design power and how it can be a rather flaky measurement when it comes to power efficiency. If anything, it's a ballpark more than anything else, but I am legitimately curious about how my kilowatt readings would change with a Ryzen 7 1700 versus a Skylake 6700K, which apparently is already getting long in the tooth. But here's the thing, you can try to be more efficient, but you don't want to be spending when you wouldn't otherwise want to spend money just to lower an incremental expense. In the case of Tuxedo to Monolith, I had a Greyhound bus of a system in terms of how it was just totally not efficient that I was swapping out after seeing far better performance per watt from Intel chips. Even if AMD has turned the table, it wouldn't really be worth it for me to start all over again when I just built this thing last year. And for what kind of performance gain? If anything, it's more of a curiosity. I have to see some kilowatt readings before I even consider a Ryzen 7 1700, but that is the only chip that has me curious at this point, and it's a stretch to say that I would upgrade to it. I am far more likely to explore AMD's 2017 offerings when Vega comes out. Let's save the money for that, because I've been noticing with the CPU-GPU usage that the 1060 was a great thing to start with, but I hit 100% on that a lot faster than I'm hitting it on the processor. So we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But those of you who have seen Lisa Su's presentation, first of all, I love her charisma. She is exactly the kind of person, I think she's taking, I think she kind of took some influence from Steve Jobs, because she's out there with blue jeans and things like that, and a really cheery voice, and here's the next big thing, and here's the new product, it's gonna be really awesome. I watched your presentation, but I'm a business guy. I take sales talk with a grain of salt. I'm the person you want asking the tough questions and making the salesperson nervous at the sales presentation, because I keep a healthy skepticism when people are giving me sales pitches. And let me tell you something, folks. Even though there were benchmarks running at this Ryzen event, when Lisa Su was announcing all the stuff that's no longer speculation, it is still sales and marketing. Keep your head on straight, and if it's not the most amazing leap in terms of mathematical computing capability, wait and see what happens. Ryzen is a new processor. Zen is a new architecture. This is a question mark of a product. Anybody who wants to know that they're making the right move to Ryzen should watch the early adopters and see what shows up in the independent YouTube videos about this processor over the next month or two before sinking all that money. Folks, marketing is marketing is marketing is marketing. And Lisa Su's wonderful presentation, wonderful though it was still marketing. Let's not forget, AMD is a company that's climbing back into the ring. Intel has them up against the wall. And even in situations where, if you want to say this is another example where AMD is the tail that wags the dog, you probably don't have the whole picture. And that's where we get into the discussion about what the people that are talking about Ryzen are not talking about. Let's deconstruct some of the things the fanboys from the AMD fanboys might be saying, beginning with the whole thing with price.
Oh, look, Ryzen! It gives you the performance of the high-end Kaby Lakes and all that lovely stuff, and nowhere near Intel's prices. Woohoo! Competition!
Nowhere near Intel's current prices. Nowhere near Intel's "we don't have any real competition, dog" prices. Intel is a company that has been making headlines for outspending AMD on research and development, the lifeblood of innovation-fueled tech companies like this, by a factor of 10 to 1. They have the size, they have the sales, and they have the clout to perfectly and adequately respond to the new threats that are being posed by AMD in the high-end desktop processor market. And that's really where Ryzen is striking first. AMD may be doing what they did with Polaris, and they're probably going to make Wall Street mad in the process again, like they did when Polaris launched, and the folks in the snoots and suits were like, "What are you doing? You're selling it for so low. You're leaving money on the table, and you're a company that needs money. Why are you doing this?" I'm sure the phones have been ringing off the hook at AMD and on Wall Street and all over the place, once again over the pricing really low and stuff like that and that sort of thing. But Intel is talking about things like processors for NAS boxes and stuff like that this week. There's a new Atom out or something like that. But it's just, Intel has the resources. They've downsized. They could do more downsizing. Believe me, it's not the end of the world at Intel just because AMD finally got their stuff together and released their first half-decent piece of silicon in years. Believe they're not shaking in their boots. Who are we kidding? Corporations don't do that sort of thing. They're giant number machines. We may see another round of layoffs at Intel or a restructuring or this, that, or the other, but it's us consumers that have the most to gain from this. And let's not go crazy about how it's the end of the world for Intel, because it isn't. We should be focusing more on the positive things for us consumers, namely that if AMD doesn't fold on these prices once the product is launched, lest we forget, there's a very legitimate pricing strategy out there called penetration pricing, where you release a product at a lower price and then find a way to raise it later to get the product out there and in people's hands and grow an actual customer base. That if there's enough brand loyalty, and with all the raging, "Oh yeah, rah rah AMD, go red revolution," with all the stuff I've heard about AMD, the rebel yell and all of it, they're in a perfect position to do that. Watch those prices. Let's check what Ryzen costs in a couple of months. But let's assume that AMD wasn't pulling that here. Let's suppose they weren't doing penetration pricing and they're actually serious about releasing these products at those performance levels, at those price levels. And there's not going to be a switcheroo in a couple of months or as we approach the holiday season later this year. Let's pretend that penetration pricing is completely not a thing. Well, Intel has more than enough resources to just lower prices, consolidate SKUs, and maybe some of the BS nonsense that they do with this one can overclock, but this one can't. We're going to issue an update that remote disables overclocking on non-K SKUs. How much of an alphabet soup does Intel have with their current lineup? I was talking earlier about how Intel's its own worst enemy because you got like the cult of Sandy Bridge gamers and refurb gamers out there that are running old factory. Old corporate surplus decommissioned off-lease systems into the ground as gaming PCs and still managing to pull off 1080-60 with a proper graphics card. I had some very choice words for Intel earlier. But I'm telling you, it's not the end of the world for them. They can just, lay off the alphabet soup. Get rid of the artificial restrictions, tear down the silos, put things on clearance, try and get rid of the old inventory, come out with less nonsense for Kaby Lake or Cannon Lake would probably be next, right? Or maybe some Kaby Lake refresh or something like that. It's not the end of the world for Intel, but it is good news for us. Because if these prices stick, if AMD has these prices that are out there, then if that forces Intel into price drops, woohoo, cheaper gaming PCs. And even if Intel didn't budge, even if they stayed at their current price points, because who does AMD think they are? Or they want to see if AMD can stick with it, the old AMD stuff, the construction chip, the 8350s, the old APUs, the AM3s, the FM2s, all this stuff that is now going out the door in favor of Ryzen AM4, that's going to go on clearance. And, people say, I can't do PC gaming, it's too expensive. There's videos all over YouTube about how you can actually pay console level prices to get your foot in the door with with PC gaming. And that's about to become even easier. Matter of fact, I was going around the office today telling folks, if you're planning on buying a computer, wait 2 months, because it's going to get very interesting with what happens to the prices if Intel caves, because AMD has something sharply undercutting them with Ryzen. If AMD can keep this up, it's good news for consumers across the board, because it's going to cost less to get into PC gaming. And if you haven't noticed, in the wonderful world of consoles, those devices that establish the baseline for video games, the prices have been going down because the consoles are going to start having multiple tiers, like the original Xbox One versus the Xbox One S versus the Scorpio, the 2 levels of PlayStation 4 and things along those lines. I mean, consoles are doing an about face with the falling prices in PC stuff and whatnot. But in terms of gaming hardware, there's going to be more choices for people than ever before, and it won't cost an arm and a leg to get some massive performance. Actually, it already doesn't cost an arm and a leg to get 1080-60 and leave the consoles in their 720p, 900p Wonderlands, 30 frames per second Wonderlands. But that's one of those things where you have to be willing to tinker a bit, which is one of the weak points of PC gaming. But the thing with Ryzen is that it's not like the world is going to explode just because AMD put out a decent chip. Indeed, there is still the potential for Ryzen to fall flat on its face. Remember what I said about how Intel is its own worst enemy. Every single thing that I said about Intel in that discussion applies to Ryzen. This is a high-end desktop processor that might give you too much horsepower out of the box for most of what's out there for games nowadays. Now, that might change in the next couple of years, but with PC gaming, it's all about scalability. You want the largest group of customers with computers possible to run your game at various resolutions. There may not be the kind of console optimization like we see with the consoles, but there are so many games out there that go way up and way down, sometimes spanning like multiple console generations from high to low graphics. But you can run it on all sorts of machines, which is a hot commodity in this day and age of Steam and account-based PC gaming. But you can actually take everything that I said about the Intel chips, the cult of Sandy Bridge. There's an AMD version of that out there. It's just not as popular, and it's a little bit more low-key, because AMD has been behind the 8 ball for so many years. But before the construction chip stuff came out, there was the Phenoms. I have Phenom 2 1090T, bought it in 2010. It took some effort to get to the point where I finally wanted to replace it last year. And there are people out there that still say that the Phenom 2s are still a beast for gaming. You can still get some decent performance out of them despite their advanced age. There's a cult of the Phenoms out there, just like there's a cult of Sandy Bridge. There is still the potential for what spawned that Intel discussion earlier, for it to affect AMD. I hope it doesn't, because they need to get back in the ring, because competition is good, and maybe Intel will start behaving itself a little better with some real competition among the enthusiasts who are swapping PC parts all the time. But just because AMD has come out with a really nice product doesn't mean it's all wine and roses. They gotta sell this thing. And they have to get it right. On March 2nd, all the stars need to align and all the cylinders need to fire at this when they're supposed to. Everything needs to be smooth as butter. Because if you notice, they were they went from nothing to everything in terms of when we could expect this chip. They dodged the release date thing over and over and over again, and then finally, boom, March 2nd, when we're like halfway through February. That is the sign of a company that is playing it safe because they know it's extremely important that they not get any bad publicity from this launch. This is what gets them back into contention, and the future of the company depends on it. And that's why I gave them a free pass when they dodged the whole question of when's the chip coming out. I may have joked about it being the Duke Nukem Forever of processors, but I agree with everybody out there who said, I hope AMD can get this right. I don't care if I don't even know when the Zen is coming out. I want to see them succeed, and I want to see this thing succeed, and I'm sure the folks at AMD want to see this succeed as well, duh. But the consumer, more than anything else, needs to see this succeed because computers have been pretty stagnant for the last couple of years, to the point where people are moaning and groaning even more about the death of the PC. The PC is going away. What have we heard, those of us who build our own systems? What have we been hearing over the past several years? It seems like that PCs keep dying and coming back. You look at the press coverage and all the speculation and everybody with an axe to grind against standardized parts that don't cost an arm and a leg to repair, that you can repair yourself, that support the whole right to repair thing with electronics. Just, But anyways, yeah, it's not the end of the world, and it's not totally nutso that AMD has a competent product that's going to force Intel to rethink their pricing strategy. Speaking of which, let's see what exactly they have on the table right now. I'm looking around Newegg. So let's suppose you want to build an i7 system. We're going to look at a couple of these families here for processors. I'm looking specifically at what Newegg sells themselves, new, no refurbs. If you want an i7 system that's Kaby Lake, the processor will set you back about $350 US. The $370 US MSRP for the Skylake variant has been put on sale for $309. Wow, that's better than what I paid. I bought my system in the summertime when the non-K was 300 and the K was 320. So woohoo, $10 cheaper than what Monolith costs. 309, but of course the Ryzen's about to come out, so maybe Intel. Maybe Newegg's trying to free up some warehouse space or something, or try and blast out the SKU because they might have to drop the price later if Intel doesn't about face. The non-K Skylake is supposed to be $335. It's on sale for $315 US. I'm not so sure I want to play with non-K if I'm going i7. The Broadwell E6800 MSRP $450, $409. The 6850K Broadwell E579. Doesn't the Ryzen go after that or something? The 7700 non-K Kaby Lake $314. And for now, at least, you still cross the $1,000 mark into rich kid chip territory with the 6900K, the 6950X, even Haswell E is still up there. Well, if you get the 5960X, 5930K is like 600 something, but I'm not really seeing any Haswell floating around on here when I look for i7s. Even Devil's Canyon's gone, so it looks like Newegg has made some room here. Let's go over to the i5s, and if you hear any motorcycles, it's a beautiful day outside, 60-something degrees in the evening in February, so folks are out there enjoying the weather because there's no bugs yet because it's still technically winter, and I'm in here messing around on the computer like a nerd. Okay, let's look at some Kaby Lake, some i5s here. $239.99 for the i5 7600, 6600's $230, $182 for the, well, you know what? I think we should ignore the non-Ks and just look at all the Ks because all the Ryzens can be overclocked. So I think that just makes the other stuff a moot point. i5 4670 for $267. This is there. Oh, there's Devil's Canyon. It's the i5. The i7s seem to be all something Lake, unless you get the rich kid chips. But yeah, in terms of the pricing strategy, I thought I'd see more of a wide range of chips. But the last time I really looked at this stuff a lot was when Skylake was first coming out. So there was still some Devil's Canyon and some Haswell floating around in the mix. But yeah, I'm curious what happens to these prices after Ryzen hits the market and starts making some waves. But let's completely forget about Intel, and let's talk about the biggest boon for people that think that PC gaming is always too expensive. expensive, and building your own computers is always too pricey versus just converting an OEM system with a graphics card and maybe another power supply. And of course, the whole thing about this myth about, oh, PC gaming, too expensive. No, just if you're willing to learn, it's actually easier to put a computer together than it is to solder and etch circuit boards with regular electronics. But the real winners here is going to be anybody who wants to snag something cheap on the way out if the prices plummet down to clearance levels for the remaining AM3, AM3 Plus, FM2 stuff. Basically the AMD stuff that made AMD the laughing stock of the processor world for years. I mean, you can still get competent 1080p gaming out of an 8350, and heck, if you want to, maybe we're far enough removed from the early 2010s now that classic combo from 2013, 8350 Sabertooth, is something folks might want to do like some kind of vintage type, or, some kind of back in the day type system. But the thing is, the old stuff has to go, and we should probably expect to see the prices plummet on that. If Intel goes down because of what Ryzen can do, I don't even want to know what an A350 is going to go for in a couple of weeks. But it will be a clearance thing, I imagine. I'm sure the production will be discontinued, and folks will be like, someone please get this stuff off our hands so we don't have to write it off our inventory. Retailers can kind of get like that. But hey, someone who wants a cheap computer, you're going to have better options than ever very shortly if things go the way I think they're going to go. Because we've all wanted competition. We've wanted some serious competition, and here it is. The Ryzen is one heck of a chip, but this is just the desktops. This is just the desktops we're talking about here. I'm doubly curious what's going to happen when the APU mobile laptop processor comes out later this year, and how good of a console replacement something like a Raven Ridge laptop will be, which will be the Turd Shiba's successor, because my curiosity will get the better of me, I imagine. But that is a bridge that we will cross when we get to it. That's about as much of the rest of the story with Ryzenmania that I'd like to talk about in this now near half-hour discussion segment. If we want to talk about anything else, we can do it later. I'm sure you've listened to this podcast enough as you're like, is he ever going to stop rambling? Yes, I will, very shortly. Here goes. Thanks for listening, everybody. Till next time, this is MultimediaJay signing off. Thanks for stopping by.